Welcome back to the Film Review Shack.
He's Daniel.
And he's Darian.
Today we are going to be talking about Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Dazed and Confused.
To start off, we're going to dive deep into Dazed and Confused.
Dazed and Confused is a 1993 comedy film directed by Richard Linklater. The film had a budget of $6.9 million, while making just shy of $8 million at the box office.
This is a fun movie to watch, and as recent college grads, Darian and I kind of fit into a little bit of the psyche that these characters portray in this movie. Now, speaking of the characters, Darian, you want to get us started off talking a bit about the acting?
Sure. Like you just mentioned, for sure there's definite similarities to where we are in our lives now and where these kids from the movie are with graduating high school and everything. As far as the acting goes, I don't think there was anything that stood out that was too phenomenal for me. However, I think they did a great job in portraying high school kids in that era and what it would look like on the last day of school for them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the casting was really good here, too. I felt like all the characters really were in a role that they were comfortable with, and they were able to portray a more lifelike depiction of the character because it was similar to what they were like in real life.
For sure. It definitely seemed like most of the roles were tailored to fit what the actors seemed like in real life. And even Matthew McConaughey had said that his portrayal of his character in Dazed and Confused was actually supposed to be based on his brother.
Oh, interesting. One thing I really liked about the screenplay and story in this movie is the consistent conflict that kept arising throughout the movie. Of course, we start off, we've got the conflict of the seniors versus the freshmen, and that kind of carries us all the way through the movie, popping up here and there. But then that's not the only conflict, and then you get other conflicts, kind of smaller conflicts that pop up to just drive the story, keep driving it forward.
Yeah, absolutely. The conflict is very consistent throughout the film. Even up into the third act, we still got characters conflicting with other characters right till the very end. Now, one thing that I found a little confusing actually about the screenplay is I didn't find that it followed your typical format. I think when watching this, it seems to be more of a character-driven film. I don't know if I could draw out an inciting incident really in that. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. This is definitely a character-driven film. You've got lots of different groups of characters, and they all have their own storylines that kind of weave through it. So in a way, there's no inciting incident for the whole film. There's more or less like smaller inciting incidents that kick off each of these characters' storylines. For example, you've got the side character, Tony, who has his own inciting incident when the freshman girl comes up to him at the start of the movie, and they have that little interaction, which kicks off his storyline that comes through in the end. And there's a couple different examples, I won't go through them all, but of where these individuals have their own inciting incident that kick off their own story arc.
Right. I think the only one event that maybe affects all the characters one way is the party being canceled. And then it also, like you just said, separates for all the characters and their story of the night starts to unfold. But it all kind of weaves together. They end up in the same place and end up sharing the night together.
Yeah, I like that you said that. You kind of have an inciting incident that brings all the storylines together. And it happens, about midway in the movie. So it's kind of like an inciting incident and midpoint put into one.
Right. And like mentioned before, again, it doesn't follow your typical structure. It creatively makes it into a character-based film.
Yeah, I really enjoy that about both of our films this week is they're both very character-driven, and you get to see different sides of the characters that you might not see in a more hero-based or a story circle kind of written film.
Right, absolutely. It almost felt like a TV episode in a way where you've got, in your typical TV episode, usually two storylines that follow groups of characters. In a sitcom, like it will split into two, and you've got two simultaneously things going on.
Yeah, for sure. It very much feels like a sitcom, as you say. My favorite part of the story, though, is just got to be the small witty banter that goes on between the characters. I love how clever it is, and it really hits home for me as a special part of this movie.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And one thing I really like about the screenplay, aside from the structure and how they do the characters and everything, was the comedy they put in and a lot of one-liners. And it really brings out a lot of personality in the characters you're seeing on the screen. And one thing I find also when watching it is you can picture some of your friends or people you went to high school with in these characters through the traits they're showing on the screen. You kind of think, oh, somebody like this would have said that, and it just makes you laugh.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to like songwriting where you're writing from an individual perspective towards the masses. And watching this movie, you feel that, whereas you can have this character that's very broad and general, but relates directly to experiences that we've both had. All right. Well, I think now, since we've covered the story, we should move on to talking about the cinematography. Darian, you want to start us off?
For sure. I really enjoyed some of the techniques they used in this film, even right from the beginning. I enjoy the coverage they decided to use. I think it's safe to say that most of us have gone through high school and have memories from that time in our lives. And it's so clever because instead of following one character or student with the camera, they introduce new characters and let ones you've already met just walk out of frame. And what I really enjoy about that is that when you are in high school, you will have memories of what you see in high school, but it becomes very enjoyable to have this idea of what everyone else around you is also doing. And it really all stems from the camera work and the techniques in the film.
Yeah, I agree. I think the lens choice really plays a good factor into that because there's not a lot of depth of field in a lot of these shots, or there's a large depth of field, I should say. So you get to see the foreground and the characters that are in the scene, but then you also get the characters in the background are still more or less in focus, and you can have that transition between what the action that's focusing on the screen, because it's a pretty easy transition between foreground and background and moving around with the camera.
Yes, definitely. Were there any scenes in particular that you thought cinematography was really great for?
Great? No, but good, yes. I'm a sucker for cars and cruising around, and so I really liked those scenes and the cinematography in that, and I felt like the way that they shot those was a great motif for the whole movie, and how it kept coming up, and the way that they were shooting it gave you that atmosphere that you were searching for, that laid back, just kind of enjoying life style.
Yes, for sure.
How about yourself?
Yeah, personally, I really enjoyed the scene where they're playing their baseball game and the lighting that was used in that scene. Someone who spent years playing baseball, it really looked like the stadium lights were the true light source for that scene. And it was an interesting dynamic because it had cut back and forth from the stadium and like a street view of the cars driving around, where the street is dark besides the car lights and the traffic lights. But then you have the baseball stadium, which is much more bright, but they're taking place at the same time, and it's really cool they cut back and forth like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I like that you bring up that scene and the lighting in that scene, because I think throughout the movie they do a really good job of varying when they're using soft lighting, and an example of that baseball scene when they're using hard lighting. And it just gives the movie a bit of a real feel, because not every light that we encounter in the world is going to be all hard or all soft. So it really helps add realism into this film.
Now, I'm going to talk about one technique that I like they used, and this is for some of the more intense conflict scenes. An example is when the baseball game is over. Mitch knows he's not going to have a good time after the game, and it goes into slow motion, and it makes the time feel like it's lasting forever, and I'm sure that's what he was feeling in that moment.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great choice in the editing and through how they shot that in order to be able to slow everything down and really bring the intensity to that moment to mimic how the character is feeling.
Definitely, and there's a couple instances of this, but I just felt that one was the most powerful.
Yeah. Well, moving on from the cinematography, one thing that's really cool about this movie is all the colors in the set design and the wardrobe. And one thing that I really like about the wardrobe in particular is how each character and each group of friends in the movie have their own wardrobe style, and it kind of helps separate. Like, you've got Matthew McConaughey's character has his own like t-shirt and pants, and then you've got the football players who have their button-up shirts that are most of the time unbuttoned, and then other groups like the freshmen have some of their own styles, but you see Mitch kind of crosses over between that, and then the more nerdy gang has their own style, and the stoner gang has their own style, and it really helps separate all those groups. And then it gives you the feel when they all come together at the party in the end, how people are mingling between each other, and you can see this person's from this group, but they're hanging out with this person now, and you really get that feel of intermingling because you have the different wardrobes signifying they're from different groups.
Yeah, it was a great way to play on the aspect of them having all the characters come together at the party. I like the separation and seeing how different aspects of life were different back then, especially when watching movies that fall into the period piece category. So seeing all the clothes, like the bell-bottoms and stuff like that, was just interesting and gets you more connected to the times that they were acting in from the film.
Yeah, for sure. Love seeing recreations of times where we weren't able to experience it, but we're able to live it through the magic of cinema.
All right, well, I think we should dive into the soundtrack now.
Let's do it.
For me, I really enjoy the soundtrack. Classic rock is, of course, my favorite music to listen to, especially the 70s era of it. And the songs that are playing always seem to be very fitting to what you see on the screen, especially with songs like School's Out, such an iconic song for being known for Last Day of School. And of course, they had to choose that to be in the film. What about you? How did you feel about the soundtrack?
Oh, I thoroughly enjoy it. As you said, I think it matches up very well. And it's well chosen. It's in at the right times. It's not overpowering, but yet you still know it's there, and it's still a very integral part of the movie. One thing that I found was pretty cool about the soundtrack as well is when they're leaving the party and the sun starts coming back up, you get the song Tuesday's Gone, and it's a song that's used in a lot of movies from that era, and I feel like it just encapsulates everything that movie's about when you can compare it to other things that happened in that era.
Yes, it was another great example of a perfectly timed song for that movie. Now, one part about the soundtrack I was actually disappointed about, and I had read about and heard about, of course, was they had tried to get various songs from Led Zeppelin to be in the film. One, of course, being Dazed and Confused, and one that they just couldn't afford the rights to, and the refusal from members of the band. And I mean, Sweet Emotion was a great song to have for the opening scene, but I think Led Zeppelin's song like Dazed and Confused would have been really good too. A little bummed about that.
Yeah, I agree. It would have definitely been very suiting for the film. And I'm sure that's what they were planning on doing when they initially thought of the concept of this movie and thought about what songs would go well. But unfortunately, sometimes you get into production and you spend all your money and then you end up in post trying to buy songs and you just can't afford them. And
yeah, the director for sure had planned to have one or two in there, but guess it's not meant to be.
Yeah. What can you do when musicians want their money? Now, similar to the wardrobe and set design that is quintessential of the time period, was there any other of the pop culture references that stood out to you?
Yeah, for sure. Even in the beginning, there were some media references. I believe there was one in the classroom at the beginning. They're talking about Gilligan's Island, which is a TV show that's more fitting that time era. And then there was another one where they were actually in a parking lot of a movie theater, and it had a sign saying, now playing Alfred Hitchcock's Family Plot, which I had looked up, and it was actually the movie that had opened that Friday night, which is a pretty cool detail to have, like a pretty down-to-the-nail, close detail.
Yeah, that's really cool that they added that in. I didn't catch that.
And one fun fact that I had found when doing a little bit of research about this film was that the actors were actually given permission to design their paddles. So at various times in the film, you'll see each actor has a paddle with different designs and words and phrases, and that was actually what the actors had put on there to give them a little piece of them in the film.
Interesting. I love that feel and how that brings authenticity, and it matches how we were saying how all these characters were casted really well into their roles. So I like that they were able to bring even more of their own personality within the props.
Yes, exactly. Now, to get into a rating of the film, I'm going to let you kick this one off. Where does this rate on your scale?
Well, thank you very much for letting me start off. I really enjoyed this movie, but I got to keep it within my scale that I've been making over these past few episodes. So I'm going to give this a 6.5 out of 10. It's a little low, but I've got some pretty high scores for some pretty good movies. And I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was well written, very fun to watch, but it doesn't quite stack up in terms of like set design and cinematography as some of the other movies that we've already reviewed.
Well, I'm a little disappointed with your rating. This is my favorite film to watch, but you just dug yourself out of your hole with your explanation, so I'll let it slide this time. Personally, I'd give it an 8 out of 10. I think there's some aspects missing. It needs its typical structure, which it doesn't have, but the comedy is great, the connection to the characters is great, the music's great, and always enjoyable.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good rating. I just kind of screwed myself in the last couple of weeks of how I've done my scale and what I've put where, so it's an ongoing battle, as we say.
We're going to take a short break now. We're going to come back with a blind ranking.
Stay tuned.
All right, so we are back with our blind ranking today. 5 comedy movies. I'm going to start by reading them to you. Let's kick it off with Airplane.
Ooh, Airplane's a good one. I'm going to start that off right in the middle with number 3.
Number 3. Good way to set the bar. Next up, I got Anchorman.
Oh, I love Anchorman. You talking the first one?
Yes, I am.
I'm going to put that one I'm going to put it at 1.
Number 1. Wow. Hot take. All right. Next, I got The Hangover.
I'm going to put that at 4.
At 4.
Yeah. I like Airplane a little bit better than that.
Next, I got Superbad.
Oh, man. Okay, Superbad's going to have to go at 2 then.
At number 5, Meet the Parents.
Oh, man. Okay, you know what? That's fine. 5's a good spot for that. I like that list.
All right.
I think that's true to myself.
Disagree, but hey, it's your list.
All right, your turn. All right, I'm going to start you off with American Pie.
American Pie, number 3.
Okay, just same as me. All right, number 2 on my list, we'll see where you put it, School of Rock.
Number 4.
Next up, Austin Powers, the first one, the International Man of Mystery.
Number 5.
Oh, man. Okay, well, you're going to have to find a 6 and 7 then. Next up, we got Harold and Kumar, Escape from Guantanamo Bay.
Oh, hope that's at 2. Hope you get something better.
Nope. Spaceballs is the last one I got for you.
Well, I guess it's going at 1. Well, that just fell apart.
I'm glad that it ended up at 1, because I love that movie. But yeah, it's a bit of a reverse order there list for you, eh?
A little bit.
Well, that's how the blind ranking goes sometimes.
I guess so.
Now we'll be taking a short break and coming back and reviewing our second movie of the day, Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Stay tuned. Okay, now we are going to get to our review of Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High is a 1982 comedy film directed by Amy Heckerling. This was her directorial debut. The film had a budget of $4.5 million and brought in $50 million internationally. To start off today, we're going to start by breaking down the acting. I liked the acting in this movie. I thought it was a little funny at times, but what did you think about it, Darian?
Yeah, I agree. It was definitely funny, especially when you watch a character like Spicoli. Brings a lot of laughs, but I don't think there's anything spectacular about the acting. Just the comedy that it brings. Similar to Dazed and Confused, they did a good job of portraying the times, this time being the 80s, but nothing too great.
Yeah, for sure. I found it funny that all these actors were they seemed like they were in their 30s, and yet they're playing high school students, and I just kind of found it funny the way that these characters are being portrayed and the personalities that are being given to them. And they, for maybe all but one or two of them, they do not seem like they're high school students.
Yeah, for sure. And one other thing of the acting, not necessarily a spectacular acting role, but was how shocking Jennifer Jason Leigh's character was this week compared to watching her in The Hateful Eight last week. I think it's still unbelievable to me to think that it's the same actress doing both of these, from the makeup and stuff that she has in Hateful Eight, and then just to see her as she is in this film. It's just crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. 2 totally different roles. Couldn't be more different. And yet she does a great job at both of them. It just shows her range as an actor, and it is quite impressive. I'm glad you brought that up.
It is, for sure. Now, what did you think about some of the cameos that were in this film? A lot of roles where there was a lot of big-time actors that just had little small snippets where they were on screen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it really added anything to the movie for me. I wouldn't say that there was a point where I saw one of these cameos and I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. It just passed for me. I didn't even really notice these cameos. They're just such small roles. They don't really affect the movie as much as the main actors do. What about yourself?
I just think that it's cool to look at it from outside the movie from that point of view and look back. A lot of the, I feel, bigger stars nowadays were smaller, whereas more of the lead actors maybe don't have as much going on for them in their catalog these days. And one cameo that I actually found interesting that you don't see on screen often was Nancy Wilson from Heart. She's actually in a car driving next to Brad when he's got his little pirate suit on from his job, and she's just sitting there laughing at him. It was a pretty funny cameo.
Yeah, that was a funny little bit in the movie for sure.
Now, speaking of the characters and the comedy that they bring, why don't we touch on that from the screenplay point of view?
For sure. I really enjoyed the comedy in this movie. Not so much the blatant in-your-face jokes, but I really enjoyed and appreciated the smaller jokes that they had written in this movie. Some of the unspoken jokes that were just you had to pick up in the visuals, or the little one-liners that some of the characters would make. That's what really made the movie and the writing for me in this. How about yourself?
Yeah, I agree. I think the director and the screenwriter did a great job at making the circumstances come funny to connect with the audience.
Yeah, for sure. They definitely get set up in a lot of different funny circumstances.
At the same time, I also think that Spicoli has some of the funniest quotes I think that I've still ever heard in a movie to this day.
Yeah, for sure. I found the Spicoli character to be pretty funny. At first, I was a little bit this isn't funny, but as the movie went on, he grew on me, and I came to appreciate the humor that character was adding into the movie.
Yeah, I think in the beginning it comes on so strong it seems a little annoying, but then through various things like seeing him and the teacher bicker back and forth is something that brought a lot of comedy, and then just how he interacts with people that he doesn't usually interact with is also funny to see.
Yeah, for sure. And like you're saying, when that scene where the first scene where he starts bickering with the teachers, the one that really won me over. And then of course you have him when he orders the pizza to the class. That was pretty funny, and I was sold on the character after that.
Yeah, for sure.
Another thing about the screenplay that was a bit of a letdown for me is that there was no central conflict that brought all of the characters together. There's lots of little conflicts throughout, as you know, we've got different stories going on with different characters, but there's nothing central that brought everything together at the end of the movie. You know, there is the dance at the end, which brings some of the characters physically together, but then you still have Brad's storyline that finishes out in the convenience store, and that it's totally separate basically throughout the whole movie, his storyline, except for just little things that bring him in with the rest of the gang. And that could be said about the rest of the stories, is there's no conflict that brings them together, but there are some circumstances where they kind of end up together. But overall, you know, it's just kind of a fact of the genre, and it wasn't a complete letdown for me. I don't know how you felt about that.
Yeah, I agree. I think in a similar nature to Dazed and Confused, it's a very character-driven film where the story doesn't have your typical three-act structure. And then, like you said, the characters don't come together at the end. They've all got their own separate things going on, and just a little bit messy and all over the place.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of each character has their own character arc, and it doesn't really have to fit into any kind of three-act structure. They all each just get their own arc, no matter when the points happen in the movie.
Right. Now, why don't we dive into the cinematography a little bit here? One thing that I quite enjoyed to see in this movie was the cars and how they decided to use the point of view angles, whether it was showing the two people in the front seat or showing the point of view of the road as them driving down. There was a lot of great shots that came from that.
Yes, I totally agree. I really enjoy the old cars in this, and just how these different exterior shots kind of establishing the feel of these scenes of the cars plays into the rest of the movie. And I just think it's really adds a nice flair to the whole movie by having this cool car scenes throughout the movie.
Absolutely. Now, for me, there wasn't much else as far as cinematography goes. I don't think there was any special sights with lighting that really stood out to me. Maybe the only one I could think of is when they're Stacy and Mark are in the restaurant, and it's pretty well lit, like lights are dimmed, kind of set a romantic kind of feel. But other than that, there was really nothing that stood out to me. What about you?
I wouldn't say that there was nothing that stood out to me, but I did like their choice of lenses and how they're using a lot of wide lenses with wide depth of fields. And it's similar to Dazed and Confused. It gives you that feel of we can see what's going on with the main characters in the foreground, and we can also see what's going on in the background. So you're not disconnected from the atmosphere of the movie, and it really helps you put yourself in and feel the atmosphere of the movie. And I think this movie does it even more than our other movie, Dazed and Confused. I really enjoy how it leans into that choice of using a wide depth of field. It just works in this movie.
For sure. I just feel that compared to movies we've done in the past, where those movies seem to go above and beyond and use a lot more effects in their lighting and stuff like that, it just felt below for me.
Yeah, it's definitely more of a realist movie where they're trying to use a lot more high-key lighting, a lot more realistic lighting. So there's not much flexibility in what you are able to do cinematography-wise.
Right.
There was one shot that really stood out to me, though, and that was the first shot that kind of established the dance scene. And that's a shot that comes off of, I think it's a pan or a zoom off of the guitar. I just liked how that scene started off establishing with the band and the guitar, and then it pulls out into the rest of the dance and then starts cutting away to the characters and all that. But I really aesthetically liked the way that they used that shot and how they framed it and panned off the guitar.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Now, to jump to one of my favorite aspects of this movie, being the soundtrack. I think a little less enjoyable than Dazed and Confused, but they still had some great selected music that came from present 80s music, but also did a little bit of stuff that came from the 70s and beyond as well. What do you think?
I agree. I overall just found the soundtrack to be very fun. It really matches the vibe of the movie. It's very lighthearted. It's just, good listening music, easy to listen to. So I found it just really blends in well with the whole movie and just overall helps build on the atmosphere and the aesthetic of the movie.
Yeah, and again, I think similar to Dazed and Confused, that it often plays to what is happening on the screen. You've got American Girl by Tom Petty playing when you first meet Stacy. Kashmir by Led Zeppelin was playing when there was suggestive dialogue to push towards that. And yeah, just a great blend of music altogether.
Yeah, I totally agree. Love these 70s, 80s movies that, the teen flicks like we're reviewing this week. They just got such great soundtracks because they just lean into the popular stuff from that day.
Right. Speaking of popular from that day, the pop culture references in this movie I felt were also a big part that played in it too. Right from the opening shot, you've got some kids at an arcade, they're playing Pac-Man. And the other thing that I quite enjoy about this film, opposed to our other film this week, is that everything you're seeing is present day to when the film was released. Whereas Dazed and Confused was made in the 90s, but based on the 70s. This one is very focused on the truth of what was happening and what everyone was doing those days.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting juxtaposition when you compare it to Dazed and Confused, which was more of a period piece. And it allows the movie to just be more true to itself and more true to the time. And you don't get as many inconsistencies as you could say. Maybe not saying that there's necessarily inconsistencies in Dazed and Confused, but it's just less of trying to remember, what was it like? What would these people be wearing? When you're making a movie based in the present time, it's really easy just to slot your characters right into what actually is going on, and it just helps give your movie a really true feel to the time, especially for someone like us who's watching it 40 years after it's made, and it still holds really true to what was at the time because they made it true to what was happening when they were making it.
Exactly. It definitely would have been a much simpler process to fix up everything for wardrobe, makeup, any other costume design, stuff like that. Another thing that I enjoyed is a lot of time you get coverage going to characters' houses and like in their rooms, and you'll see like their posters, and they kind of differentiate themselves on what music they listen to, what they're influenced by. So in a beginning scene, Stacy talks about even a Pat Benatar reference, and then you cut to Mike later in the movie. He's got like an Elvis Costello poster on the wall. What about you? How did that play for you?
Yeah, I really like how they all have their own separate personalities, and I think I was saying that as well about Dazed and Confused. Each character has their own personality in this film, and it really shows, as you're saying, through the set design and through the posters in the room and such. And I really like that because it helps separate these individual stories and give each one of them their own characteristics.
Right, and the one thing I like is, opposed to the other movie, I feel that there's so much more diversity in these characters, and maybe that comes from the story and they're not all coming together. But Dazed and Confused, they're all at the same party. They're all kind of listening to the same music just by circumstance of how the film was made. But Fast Times, they really get the separation feel that also brings a lot of diversity.
For sure. This movie is definitely more focused on keeping their characters and groups separate.
For sure. Now, one thing I noticed, there was a pop culture reference inconsistency, and I don't know if it was a character choice that the writers made or what quite happened there, but there was a scene where Mike was giving advice to Mark about what to do on a date with Stacy, and one of the tips he gave him was, if all else fails, put on any song from the A side of Led Zeppelin. And I think in like 3 seconds it cuts to a new scene and plays a totally different song from a totally different album of Led Zeppelin. And I don't know if they just made that to be something Mark chose to do, or if they just didn't realize it flew by them. I don't know, but just something I picked up on.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of what was going through the sound supervisor's head when they were picking out that song. Run It Follows, a name drop of an album, and then you don't put a song from that album but from the same band. I don't know, maybe it's just them being a little cheeky and being like, haha, see if anyone picks this up, they'll get the reference. It's a little inside joke, you could say. Or maybe they just were so oblivious and didn't realize that it was a different Led Zeppelin song from a different album. Who knows? Whatever happens in the editing room stays in the editing room.
Right. And one other thing that I just thought about is Led Zeppelin being notorious for not giving rights to their music, so perhaps something from their older music wasn't allowed to be played, but this newer song perhaps was.
Yeah, that definitely could be the case.
Now, one other thing that I'd like to talk about is I did some digging around trying to find some facts about Fast Times, and there was a lot of stuff online about other actors that were initially meant to play the roles opposed to the actors that we saw on screen. So the first one I found being Tom Hanks was initially supposed to play the role of Brad, Stacy's older brother. However, he was deemed not to be a big enough star at the time. Kind of funny to think about.
Yeah.
Jodie Foster was supposed to play Stacy, the main girl, but eventually turned it down. And Matthew Broderick actually turned down the role of Spicoli, which was instead given to Sean Penn, who didn't even have to audition and was hired off of his energy alone.
Wow. That's really interesting. Matthew Broderick almost had that role. That would have been very interesting to have him in that role. Probably would have given a much different feel to the character.
But I couldn't picture it.
No?
No, maybe because Spicoli's so iconic and everybody thinks of him when you think of the movie, but to me, I just couldn't see anybody else doing that role the way he did that.
Fair enough. Yeah, it definitely would have been different. And you might say that the movie might not have been as successful without Sean Penn.
Could be.
But yeah, that's just interesting that you say all these actors that could have potentially been in this movie that weren't. And Tom Hanks, such an interesting name to have been thrown out for this one, and he was deemed not big enough. And of course, we know where Tom Hanks has gone since the 80s.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think it's about time for us to get into a rating. Darian, you want to lead us off for this movie?
Sure, sounds good. I think, like stuff we talked about earlier, lacking the structure, lacking a whole conclusion and everything wrapping up. So I'm going to go with a 7 today. Really great comedy, but beyond that, and the music, not too much for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat that I was with Dazed and Confused. I'm kind of screwed by my own rankings that I've given in the past, and I can't put this any higher than Back to the Future, but yet I can't go as low, any really much lower than Dazed and Confused, so I'm just going to give it the same ranking. I'm going to go with a 6.5. That's fair for all the components for this movie, at least in my opinion, and I enjoyed it, so... It's definitely a recommend watch for me, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
So that is our review of Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with a new segment called 20 Questions, Movie Edition.
Stay tuned.
All right, we are introducing a new segment today, 20 Questions. Each of us come up with a movie, and the other person has to guess the movie correctly using 20 questions. Why don't you start by asking?
All right. Well, my first question will be, is this a comedy movie?
It is not.
It is not, okay. Is this a drama?
Yes, it's dramatic.
Okay. Is this involve superheroes in any way?
No.
Okay. Does this involve an A-list celebrity?
At the time of the movie, yes.
Okay. Is this someone known for doing action movies?
I wouldn't say known for it, no.
Okay. But they have done it, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Does that count as a question? Does that count as a question?
That's the follow-up. We'll count it as the same question.
Okay. Has this person been in superhero movies?
No.
Okay. I'll steer clear of that then. Has this person worked with Quentin Tarantino?
No.
Okay. Is this movie done by a very well-known director?
Yes.
Could you say it's a horror movie?
I wouldn't say it's a horror movie.
Okay. Is this a Spielberg movie?
No.
Is this pre-2000?
Yes.
Is this from the 1980s?
No.
Is it before the 1980s?
Yes.
Is this movie a part of a series or is it a standalone?
Standalone movie.
Okay. Is it from the 70s?
Yes.
Does this movie involve Clint Eastwood?
No.
Dang. Has this director won an Academy Award?
I believe so. Yes.
Is this movie still popular today?
I think it's got its place.
Okay. Would this be considered to be a top 100 movie of all time?
I think depending on who you ask, but I think I've definitely seen it in one or two of those lists.
Okay. Is this Star Wars?
This is not Star Wars.
Dang. All right, what was it?
Apocalypse Now.
Oh, Apocalypse Now. Of course, Martin Sheen.
Francis Coppola.
Yeah.
Pretty sure he won for one of the Godfathers.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. Dang. It's one of my favorite movies.
So close, but so far.
Okay, so now I'll go give you one, or I'll let you ask me 20 questions and see if you can get the movie I'm thinking of.
All right, is this a comedy movie?
This is not a comedy movie.
Is it an action movie?
This is an action movie.
Is it made in the 21st century?
No, it was not.
Is it made by a big-time director?
Yes.
Was it starring an A-list celeb?
Not at the time.
1980s?
No.
1970s?
No.
1990s?
Yes.
Is it Speed?
It is not Speed.
Is there more than one lead character?
You could say that, but it's really, there's one main character, but it kind of has a strong supporting role.
Is it a sci-fi action?
Yes, it is.
Is it The Matrix?
It is not The Matrix.
Is it Men in Black?
It is not Men in Black.
Does it take place in outer space at any capacity?
Yes, part of the movie takes place in outer space.
Is there comedy to it?
There is comedy in it, yes.
Okay. Is it Independence Day?
It's not, no.
Is it Apollo 13?
It is not.
Is it in the Star Wars franchise?
It is.
Is it Phantom Menace?
It is. There you go. With one question to spare.
Perfect. Well, that's our 4th episode of the Film Review Shack. Thanks for tuning in.
Come back every week for a new episode of the Film Review Shack.
Signing out.
I'm Daniel.
I'm Darian.
And we are
The Film Review Shack.